So today's talk is going to start with chapter 17 in the book, The Places That Scare You. And this chapter is titled Bodhisattva Activity. And she says that this Bodhisattva activity is our training, and that what is really important is to have the motivation to wake up for the welfare of the world. In other words, to travel the path and actually try to become a bodhisattva and then benefit all beings while we are in this world. And I don't think it takes more than a moment of reflection to realize that the world could use a lot of help today. It's not that it didn't need a lot of help a year ago or 5 years ago or 20 years ago, but there are just so many problems that are right in the forefront right now, whether it be the COVID pandemic, the problems of social isolating and the economic pain that it has caused, and then the latent racism in the United States is coming to the forefront big time right now. So all of this really indicates that this is really what is needed in the world. More outrage is not necessarily all that important. More anger, more fear. These are huge problems. We don't need any more of that. So with Bodhisattva training, the core of this is the 6 Paramitas. And she calls them, quote, 6 ways of compassionate living. And she approaches it this way, that each of these activities that are embodied in these 6 Paramitas take us beyond aversion and attachment, beyond being caught up in ourselves, beyond the illusion of being separate from everybody else and separate from the rest of the world. And finally, she says, beyond the fear of letting go. And that is a huge thing that we need to work with successfully. This is why she calls Bodhisattva training warrior training. The idea of the warrior is a being that does not give in to fear, not a being that makes war with everybody, but a being that has tremendous amount of bravery and does not give in to fear as it crops up throughout a person's daily life. The traditional metaphor of the Bodhisattva path is going from one shore to another in a boat. And she has her own take on this. She says that practicing the 6 Paramitas is an in-between state. And she'll talk about this more in some of the subsequent chapters. But it is in between, being liberated from ego clinging, a certain groundless state where there's no solid ground to hold your beliefs and so forth. So her picture of this boat that takes us from one shore to the other is, quote, in the middle of the river with the shoreline out of view, the raft begins to disintegrate. We find ourselves with absolutely nothing to hold on to. From the conventional standpoint, this is scary and dangerous. However, one small shift of perspective will tell us that having nothing to hold on to is liberating. We could have faith that we won't drown. Holding on to nothing means we can relax in this fluid, dynamic world, unquote. That's on 94, page 94. So she says this is, there's a sense of journey, but instead of going somewhere, you are leaving things behind, which is a very interesting twist on this boat metaphor. We're not going to the other shore, we're leaving the shore we are on behind us. Sometimes it is said that when it uses the metaphor of you're going to the other shore, that when you get there, you realize that you always were there, you never left. So this is perhaps a bit of a paradox, but this is the way Tibetan Buddhism is. As we travel the Mahayana path, there are paradoxes here and there. It doesn't necessarily fit neatly into neat explanations. And the sixth of the 6 paramitas is a paramita of wisdom. And she says this is actually the whole basis of this training, that this paramita of wisdom is about absolute truth. It's about our Buddha nature. It's about the absolute being beyond concept. And this is why it can be paradoxical, because it is beyond concept, and you can't really put the absolute into words. So she calls this unconditional bodhicitta. And I've talked about this before in discussing this book because it has come up in the past. So this absolute or unconditional bodhicitta is an unfixed mind that is awareness, but it is without judgment of what it is aware of. This unfixed mind doesn't add layers of conceptuality to our experience. And it is mindfulness that is the foundation of this wisdom. And that is paying attention to all the details of our life and all the details of our experience, but then not add layers of conceptuality to it. And so she kind of sums up this part by saying that this paramita of wisdom, or prajna paramita, takes us from from narrow-minded to open-minded, flexible, and fearless. And to kind of sum up part of what these 6 paramitas do, here is a quote on 95. The power of the paramitas is not that they are commandments, but they challenge our habitual reactions. They are ways of us to look at our habitual patterns, our habitual way of behaving, of thinking, our habitual emotionality, and see through them. So then she goes through the other 5 paramitas. And the first one is generosity. And this unlocks the habit of clinging. And it's not so much how you give as that you give. That ordinarily we are very careful with who we give objects to and give money to, give our time to. There are lots of things that we can be generous with. And this practicing generosity will show us where we are stuck, where we need to let go. And she says pain is a sign of holding on to something. So this is again where mindfulness comes in. It's very important to not only be mindful of what is going on in our lives, what we're doing, but our reactions to it, where we start holding back. When we get to the edge of what we're comfortable with and what we're uncomfortable with. And over time, by practicing generosity, we will experience a result of a change in our perspective. We'll start seeing things differently. And it will be little by little. And after you have noticed that there's been a change in perspective, you will continue to experience a change in perspective. It isn't like there is a goal, and when you get to that point, you have perfected the practice of generosity. The actual perfection of generosity happens when you become enlightened. But up to that point, there's always room to change our perspective. So the next of these 6 paramitas is discipline. And discipline here, I like to explain, is not about punishment. It's about having ethical standards and following these ethical standards. Discipline is a conduct that de-escalates suffering. It is practicing non-harm towards yourself and towards others. And then the other side of the coin is practicing benefiting ourselves and benefiting others. A common approach is to look at what is of short-term benefit to ourselves and engaging in that. But in actuality, chasing after fleeting pleasures just causes more suffering. And by the very nature that it is fleeting, these pleasures don't last. And what is beneficial is not absolute, it's situational. What could be beneficial in one situation might be the opposite in another. Providing a meal for a person that would like to eat is beneficial in most cases. But if it may be quite harmful if the person is overweight and a compulsive eater. I think the term is morbidly obese. So there's no act that is inherently virtuous and none that is inherently non-virtuous. This requires keeping an open mind and being mindful and present as we're going through our lives and deciding what is beneficial and what is harmful and what to engage in and what to avoid. She tells the story of a ship captain who was on a ship full of passengers, and a man came aboard that wanted to kill everybody by sinking the ship, and the captain killed the man. The Buddha told this story, and the captain killed the man to save the life of all the people on the boat, as well as to keep that man that wanted to kill everybody from accumulating the karma of killing everybody on the boat. So we need to be careful, and we have to realize there are no hard, fast rules for bodhisattvas. The third is patience. And she describes it as this way: learning to relax with the restlessness of our energy. It isn't necessarily just being calm with no thoughts or no distractions, but what patience is being able to be with whatever arises and not try to escape from it, to actually be with it, be present. And she told the story of a man that was in traffic. And he tried to be patient, but in the end, he lost it. And then having lost it, he then recovered and tried to work with it. What's really important about bodhisattva training is that not that we don't make any mistakes, but that we learn from our mistakes. That bodhisattva training is not being perfect, but it is learning from our mistakes, using our mistakes, letting the situation that we are in teach us. And she talks about the slogan, "Don't try to be the fastest." She says, with any of these paramitas, don't be too ambitious. Try to be aware of your limitations in terms of how patient you can be, how generous you can be, and so forth. And recognize your limitations and recognize that you are human, and because you're human, you will make mistakes. So even when the outcome is not a good outcome, when we intended to have a good outcome, there's nothing to hold on to, and there's no point in beating yourself up when you feel that you failed. This is training, practice. The next is enthusiasm, and it is defined as joyful exertion. So she says, as we relax with the groundlessness that this joy will naturally arise. She brings in this threefold purity at this point. And again, these are her own words. I've not quite heard this in this way before. So here are her words. That's on page 97. Quote, "No big deal about the doer, no big deal about the action, and no big deal about the result." So don't have expectations. And again, let go of ambition. Don't try to be the fastest. Let go of hope of fruition. Just do it because you're a bodhisattva in training. And this joyful energy will arise. And this joyful energy helps carry us through our daily life, carry us through our practice. And the fifth one, since we talked about the sixth paramita first, which was the perfection of wisdom, this is actually the last paramita. And she is very simple about talking about meditation. And she says, train in simply being present. Just train in being in the present moment and not in your thoughts, not in fear, not wanting to be somewhere else, and so forth. So that finishes chapter 17. Now we're on to chapter 18. The title of this is Groundlessness. And she discusses the Heart Sutra. And what that means is that this chapter goes into the prajna paramita in greater depth. And again, her approach to it is a fresh approach. She starts out with a quote by Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. And so I'm going to read it. This is on page 99. The everyday practice is simply to develop a complete acceptance and openness to all situations and emotions and to all people. Experiencing everything totally without mental reservations and blockages, so that one never withdraws or centralizes into oneself. So what he is talking about is this unconditional bodhicitta, this ultimate bodhicitta, the prajna paramita. Prajna means wisdom. It's this wide open, groundless dimension of our being that we have spent lifetimes trying to build ground underneath us, because it can be so unsettling. So the Buddha's followers, he had given many teachings to about, among other things, impermanence and egolessness, that nothing is solid or predictable, and that they knew that suffering results from grasping and from fixation. But now it was time for him to teach his students beyond that, to go beyond that. Because ego can use anything to maintain the illusion of security. Ego can fixate on impermanence, insubstantiality, even egolessness. So the Buddha taught, when he first taught the Prajnaparamita, and then in subsequent teachings of the Prajnaparamita, he taught that any description of reality was a trap. That any conceptuality was a trap if you held on to it. So in her words, she said that him teaching the Heart Sutra, quote, wiped away all of their existing conceptions about the nature of reality. That the only way to really understand the teachings on bodhicitta are to abide in unconditional openness, to always let go, to never hang on. Now, this sutra was not given by the Buddha. It was given in the presence of the Buddha, and at the end, he approved of it, basically saying that this is the way things are, this is the way that I would teach it. It was Avalokiteshvara that actually spoke the majority of the words in the Heart Sutra. And Shariputra asked questions of Avalokiteshvara. Right off the bat, Avalokiteshvara states that the teachings of the Buddha lack inherent reality, and he basically negates them. He says they are empty. Now, the way to understand emptiness, which is very difficult, is conventionally taught this way: to understand interdependence or interconnected, to understand that causes and conditions are what bring things into being. That when you eat supper tonight, that the food just didn't magically appear. It wasn't created by a higher being, that there were people that had to grow it, people that had to pick it, people that had to process it, then it needed to be transported to a grocery store where you had to go to buy it, and you had to bring it home, and then finally you had to prepare it and eat it, that all of these things had to be done in that order in order for you to have a meal, any meal. So it's not that the food was empty, but that it was empty of having inherent reality within itself, that the reality was that there were causes and conditions that brought it into being, and that the food has no ability to keep itself from ceasing to be food. It very quickly spoils, for instance. So this is very important. Emptiness doesn't mean that appearances go away. It's just that appearances aren't the way we think they are. And another way to look at this is that the way things the way we see things is through comparison. Today is a summer day. We just had the first day of summer. For a summer day in Wisconsin, it was a cool day. It actually rained just a little bit here, off and on, and it was a relatively cool day. But if you go up above the Arctic Circle, then maybe it wasn't such a cool day. It might have been a warm day. You go down to Florida, and there they might feel it was a cold day, an unusually cold day. And so it is with everything that big is a comparative word. Bigger than what? Smaller than what? And so forth. So everything in the relative world is interrelated because of causes and conditions. And then the way we judge it is based on comparisons and so forth. So she mentions Thich Nhat Hanh in her book, in the section about wisdom. And she says that he uses the word understanding for wisdom. She says she interprets understanding to be basic intelligence. Which we all have. That you could call it also our Buddha nature. She says, to go into this a little bit more, Prajna Paramita is mind unfettered by any concepts or constructs, no beliefs, ideology, or agenda. It is freedom, curiosity, a fresh take. It's cultivating a simple, direct relationship with our being. A feeling of whatever arises in our mind, it's workable. So then she goes on to the classic quote in the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is also form, emptiness is no other than form, form is no other than emptiness. And a lot of words have been put in print and have been spoken about that particular part of the Heart Sutra. And she says what that means is everything, all inner and outer phenomena, is not solid. That it is mere appearance that is empty of inherent reality. That whatever arises in the realm of appearances, different people will have different opinions about what it is. And if we include animals like dogs, they will not see it the way we see it either. They will see it totally different based on their habitual patterns and karma. But yet, even though everything is not solid, not established, everything arises from emptiness. The good, the bad, the ugly, the heartbreaking, the heartwarming. Everything arises from it. And that is what is being hinted at when it says emptiness is no other than form, and form is no other than emptiness, that everything arises from emptiness, and everything returns to emptiness. So then after that, the Avalokiteshvara lists different elements of the Buddha's teachings. And it's not my intent here to go into the Heart Sutra and give another commentary on it. And she only briefly goes over the Heart Sutra. But basically, what she is saying, the Buddha said, is that all the different elements of the Buddha's teachings that he had been giving for years before the Heart Sutra, all of them have nothing to hold on to. That you actually have to let go of them if you want to reach the end of the path. Now, some of the students that were present, it said when they heard this, they were hanging on and clinging so tightly to what the Buddha had said previously that they had heart attacks. She said, probably they just plain walked out in disgust. That this long list of things that the Buddha negated, or Avalokiteshvara negated, it says there is no final attainment, no ultimate answer, no resting place. And so forth. And of course, when that happens, then we are free of conflicting emotions. We're free of believing in a separate self. And at that point, we have no fear. So the mantra associated with the Heart Sutra, she translates as meaning this. First, she gives Trungpa Rinpoche's commentary on the meaning of the mantra, which is Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Soha. So Trungpa Rinpoche translated it this way: Om, gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond, awake, so be it. And her commentary is Om, groundlessness, groundlessness, more groundlessness, even beyond groundlessness, fully awake, so be it. This is on page 104. So finally, she says, enlightenment isn't the end of anything. That is actually the beginning of further groundlessness. It is the beginning of entering into we know not what.